What happens when a Hollywood legend sits down for what should be a simple interview and finds himself face to face with a host who refuses to show even basic respect? It only took 37 seconds after one particularly loaded question for Clint Eastwood to make a decision that would leave the entire studio in absolute silence. The air in the studio felt different that morning. Clint Eastwood walked onto the view set with that signature steady walk, the kind that comes from decades of commanding respect both in front of and behind the camera. At 80-something years old, he carried himself like someone who had nothing left to prove to anyone. The audience cheered as he made his way to the table, waving politely, that subtle half-smile crossing his face. Whoopi Goldberg started things off friendly enough. "Welcome, welcome. It is so good to have you here," she said, gesturing to the empty seat. Clint nodded, settling into the chair with an ease that suggested he had done 1,000 of these interviews before. And he had. Joy Behar jumped in next, grinning wide. "We have been looking forward to this all week. I mean, come on, you are an absolute legend." "Well, I appreciate that," Clint replied, his voice that familiar gravelly tone. "Good to be here." Sarah Haynes leaned forward, already launching into a question about his latest project, something about a film he had been working on. Clint answered thoughtfully, taking his time with his words the way he always did. There was no rush in the way he spoke. Every sentence felt deliberate. But then Sunny Hostin cut in. "Can I ask you something?" she said, not really waiting for permission. Her tone had an edge to it, something sharper than what the others had been using. "You have been in this industry for how long now? 60 years? 70? "Something like that," Clint said, still calm. "Right. So you have seen a lot of change. Or maybe you have not seen enough change, depending on how you look at it." She paused, letting that hang in the air for a second. "Because when I look at your films, I see a pattern. A lot of tough guys. A lot of violence. A lot of, well, let me just say it. A lot of outdated ideas about masculinity." The other hosts shifted in their seats. Whoopi glanced sideways at Sunny. Joy's smile faltered just a bit. Clint did not react right away. He just looked at her, steady. "Outdated ideas," he repeated slowly. "Yeah, I mean, do you not think that the way you have portrayed men in your movies, all that stoic, silent, tough guy stuff, do you not think that has maybe done some harm? That it has set back conversations we are trying to have about what it means to be a man in today's world?" There was a beat of silence. The audience was quiet now, sensing the shift in energy. "I think," Clint started, choosing his words carefully, "that I have told stories about complicated people. Flawed people. People trying to do what they think is right, even when they make mistakes. That is what drama is." Sunny shook her head, not satisfied with that answer. "But it is always the same type of person, is it not? It is always some grizzled guy with a gun who does not talk about his feelings and solves everything with violence. And we are supposed to cheer for that?" "Now hang on," Whoopi interjected, trying to steer things back. "I think what Clint does is create characters who are products of their time and their circumstances." But Sunny kept going. And those circumstances always seem to justify the violence. They always seem to justify the lack of emotional intelligence. I just think maybe, after all these years, you could have evolved a little bit more, told some different stories. Clint leaned back slightly, and you could see something change in his expression. Not anger exactly, but a kind of weariness. Like he had heard this before, and was tired of hearing it again. "I have told the stories I wanted to tell," he said, "and people connected with them. That is all any filmmaker can hope for." "But who are those people?" Sunny pressed. "Because from where I am sitting, it seems like you have spent your career making movies for a very specific audience, an audience that maybe is not as relevant as it used to be." Joy jumped in, trying to lighten the mood. "Okay, well, I think we can all agree that Clint has made some incredible films. Unforgiven, Million Dollar Baby, Gran Torino. These are movies that have touched people. Sure, Sunny said, waving her hand dismissively. But they also reinforce a lot of problematic ideas. And I think at some point we have to ask ourselves if art gets a free pass just because it is well made. Alyssa Farah Griffin, who had been mostly quiet up until now, spoke up. I think there is room for all kinds of stories, though. Not every movie has to have the same message. Sunny turned to her. But when you have the platform that someone like Clint has, do you not have a responsibility to use it wisely? I have always used it the way I see fit, Clint said, his voice still even, but with a firmness underneath. I do not make movies to push an agenda. I make them to explore human nature. Human nature, Sunny repeated, almost mockingly. Okay, so when you had that whole empty chair thing, was that exploring human nature? Or was that just political theater? The other hosts tensed up. That was a low blow, bringing up something from years ago that had been debated to death. That was a convention speech, Clint said. It was what it was. It was embarrassing, Sunny shot back, and it showed a side of you that a lot of people found really disappointing. It showed that maybe you are not quite the thoughtful artist you pretend to be. Now the audience started murmuring. This had gone beyond a tough interview into something more personal. Whoopi put her hand up. Okay, Sunny, I think we need to pump the brakes here a little. But Sunny was not, backing down. No, I am sorry, but I think this is a conversation worth having. This man has been held up as some kind of icon for decades, and nobody wants to ask him the hard questions. Nobody wants to say, hey, maybe some of the things you have put out into the world are not okay anymore. Clint sat there, his jaw tight. You could see him processing, deciding how to respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, but somehow more powerful. I came here today to talk about my work, he said. To have a conversation. But it seems like you already made up your mind about who I am before I even sat down. I made up my mind based on your body of work, Sunny countered. Based on the choices you have made. You do not know me, Clint said. You know movies. You know characters. You do not know what I think or what I believe beyond what I put on screen. Then tell us, Sunny challenged. Tell us what you believe. Because from where I am sitting, it looks like you believe in a version of America that does not exist anymore. A version that a lot of us are glad is gone. Sarah jumped in, her voice a little shaky. I think what Sunny is trying to say, maybe not in the best way, is that audiences are looking for different things now. They want to see themselves reflected in more diverse ways. And I respect that, Clint said, looking at Sarah. I do. But that does not mean the stories I have told are invalid. It does not mean they do not have value. Sunny laughed, but it was not a friendly laugh. Value to who? To people who want to live in the past? To people who connect with them, Clint replied. Which, last time I checked, is still a lot of people. Yeah, well, a lot of people also connected with some pretty terrible things throughout history, Sunny said. Popularity does not equal correctness. That statement hung in the air like a bomb. The other hosts looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Joy tried to say something, but Sunny kept rolling. I'm just saying, at a certain point, you have to look in the mirror and ask yourself if the legacy you are leaving behind is really the one you want. If making movies about angry white men with guns is really the hill you want to die on. Clint stared at her for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just made a decision. You know what? He said quietly. I think I am done here. Whoopi immediately tried to intervene. No, Clint, come on. We can move on to something else. But Clint was already standing up, carefully removing the microphone that had been clipped to his shirt. Clint, please, Sarah said, her voice almost pleading. We have more questions. Good questions. Clint shook his head slowly. I have been interviewed a lot of times in my life, he said, still in that calm tone. By people who liked my work, by people who did not, by people who agreed with me, by people who thought I was completely wrong about everything. And that is fine. That is part of the job. He set the microphone down on the table gently. But I have never sat down with someone who seemed to have such contempt for me before even having a conversation. And life is too short for that. Sunny crossed her arms. So you are just going to walk away? That is very on brand for you. Sunny, Whoopi said sharply. But Clint just looked at her one more time. I hope whatever you are angry about, you find peace with it. I really do. And then he turned and started walking toward the exit. The studio fell into chaos. Producers were scrambling. The audience was gasping and whispering to each other, and the other hosts were talking over one another, trying to figure out what to do. Joy called out, Clint, wait, please. Alyssa stood up like she might go after him. This is not how this was supposed to go. But Clint kept walking, that same steady pace he had come in with. He did not storm off. He did not slam anything or make a scene beyond the act of leaving itself. He just walked with dignity right out of the studio. Sunny sat back in her chair, her face unreadable. Maybe she was satisfied. Maybe she was shocked that he had actually left. It was hard to tell. Whoopi looked at her, frustration clear in her expression. What was that? That was me asking legitimate questions, Sunny replied. That was you attacking a guest, Joy said, her voice sharp. There is a difference between challenging someone and just being hostile. I was not being hostile, Sunny insisted. I was being honest. You were being disrespectful, Sarah added quietly. He is a person. Whatever you think of his movies, he is still a person who deserves basic respect. The camera operators did not know where to point their cameras. The director was probably losing their mind in the control room. This was live television imploding in real time. Alyssa tried to regain some control. We need to go. To commercial. We need to figure this out. But before they could cut away, Sunny leaned into her microphone one more time. If he cannot handle a tough conversation, then maybe he is not as tough as all those characters he plays. That comment seemed to be the final straw for Whoopi. Enough. We are done. Cut to commercial. Now. The screen faded, but not before catching one last glimpse of the empty chair where Clint had been sitting just minutes before. Backstage, crew members caught sight of Clint as he made his way out of the building. A few people apologized to him, looking embarrassed about what had happened. He nodded to them, thanked them for their kindness, and kept moving. One production assistant, a young woman who looked mortified, said, Mr. Eastwood, I am so sorry. That should never have happened. Clint paused, turned to her, and said simply, It is what it is. You take care. And then he was gone, out the door and into the waiting car that would take him, away from the view, away from that table, away from a conversation that had stopped being a conversation almost from the start. Back in the studio, as they came back from commercial, the energy was completely different. The hosts tried to move forward with the show, but there was a tension that could not be hidden. Whoopi looked tired. Joy looked frustrated. Sarah looked sad. Alyssa looked confused about how things had escalated so quickly, and Sunny looked defiant. We are back, Whoopi said, her voice flat. Obviously, that did not go as planned. Should we talk about what just happened? Joy asked. I think we should, Sarah said, because that was uncomfortable to watch, and I can only imagine how uncomfortable it was for everyone here and at home. Sunny shrugged. I asked questions that needed to be asked. If he did not want to answer them, that is his choice. There is a way to ask hard questions without making someone feel attacked, Alyssa said carefully. I think maybe the approach was a little too aggressive. Too aggressive for who? Sunny challenged. For a man who has spent his entire career celebrating aggression? That is rich. Whoopi closed her eyes for a second, like she was summoning patience from somewhere deep inside. The point of having guests on this show is to have a dialogue, not a prosecution. I was having a dialogue, Sonny insisted. No, Joy said firmly. You were making statements disguised as questions. You were putting words in his mouth and judging him before he even had a chance to fully respond to anything. The audience started clapping at that, showing their support for Joy's perspective. Sonny looked around, clearly realizing that she did not have the support she thought she might. So we are just supposed to go easy on people because they are famous, because they are legends? That is not journalism. This is not journalism, Whoopi said. This is a talk show. And on a talk show, you actually have to let people talk. The rest of the show limped along. They tried to do their other segments, tried to laugh and move on, but everyone watching could feel the weight of what had happened. It was the kind of television moment that people would talk about for days, maybe weeks. Social media was already exploding. Some people defended Sonny, saying she was just holding someone accountable. But far more people were criticizing her approach, saying she had been unnecessarily cruel to a guest who had come on the show in good faith. Clips of Clint walking off started circulating within minutes. The image of him calmly removing his microphone and leaving with his head held high became iconic almost instantly. He did not yell. He did not insult anyone. He just decided he was done and acted on it. And that decision, that moment of standing up for his own dignity, resonated with people. Because everyone has been in a situation where they felt disrespected, where they felt like someone was attacking them rather than engaging with them. And everyone has wished they had the courage to just stand up and walk away. Clint Eastwood showed people what that looks like. In the hours after the show, people dissected every moment. They analyzed every word that was said. They debated whether Sonny had crossed a line, or whether Clint had been too sensitive. But one thing was clear to almost everyone who watched it unfold. This was not an interview. This was an ambush. And Clint Eastwood, at an age where most people would have just sat there and taken it, chose a different path. He chose to remove himself from a situation that was not serving anyone. Some called it a power move. Some called it a statement. Some just called it self-respect. Whatever you want to call it, it was definitive. Clint Eastwood came onto The View to talk about his work, his life, his perspective. Instead, he walked into a room where someone had already decided who he was and what he represented, and that person was not interested in being proven wrong. So he left. Simple as that. And in doing so, he reminded people that no matter who you are, no matter what you have accomplished, you do not have to subject yourself to cruelty disguised as conversation. You do not have to sit there and accept being talked down to or dismissed or mocked. You can just stand up, remove the microphone, and walk away. The View continued after that. They finished the show. They went to commercial breaks. They laughed at the appropriate times and transitioned to the next segment like professionals. But everyone there knew something had broken. Something had been revealed about the dynamic at that table, about what happens when genuine curiosity and challenging questions cross the line into something else entirely. Whoopi wrapped up the show with a brief comment. "Today was a day," she said, and there was exhaustion in her voice. "Not every show goes the way you plan. Not every conversation ends the way you hope. But that is live television. That is real life. We will be back tomorrow." And they were. The next day, The View came back on the air. They addressed what had happened briefly, with Whoopi making it clear that the show valued respectful dialogue above all else. Sonny offered a partial statement that some interpreted as an apology and others saw as a defense of her position. But Clint Eastwood did not come back. He did not release a statement. He did not go on other shows to talk about what happened. He just moved on with his life, the way he had always moved on from everything. Because that is who he is. Someone who says what needs to be said, does what needs to be done, and then moves forward without dwelling on it. The audience that watched it happen, though, they did not move on so quickly, because they had witnessed something rare in modern media. They had seen someone refuse to play a game they did not sign up for. They had seen someone choose their own peace over the spectacle that everyone else seemed to want. In a world where everyone is expected to just sit there and take it, where being confrontational is often praised as being bold, Clint Eastwood did something radical. He walked away. And in doing so, he won. Because the real power is not in having the last word. It is in knowing when the conversation is not worth having anymore.